Welcome back, entrepreneurs, wealth builders. Michael Rosmer here. I'm excited for this lesson. This is a super important subject, okay? So we've talked before about, we've got value versus price, and we've talked about price being determined by the forces of supply and demand. Well, now the question is, what about value? Where does value come from? And this is the subject we call valuation, okay? So, valuation. All right? And what you need to understand is that valuation, the value of something, is played out by two components. Okay, there's always two components of valuation. All right, there is the underlying, what we'll call the underlying asset. Okay, so underlying asset, and then there's the productivity of that asset. Okay, productivity, which is like the output, and we're also going to go slash utilization or utility. Okay? Useful things to understand. Okay, now, so let's give you an example of a car. Okay? So a car, of course, has an underlying asset, right? And it has a productive or utility value, right? Which means that it's going to save you a certain amount of time or money, or help to make you some money, right? Those are the things that it's going to do, or help you to get more done with the same amount of time, okay? So that's going to dictate, to some extent, what it's worth. Now, of course, there could be some other utility, right, like prestige and comforts and things like this, right? So it's not entirely, utility is not entirely based on simply time and money, right? It could be these other spin-offs from like a non-business standpoint. From a business standpoint, we're primarily concerned with those. What about, so that's the underlying asset, okay? But I want you to notice something, that the underlying asset has depreciation, okay? Depreciation. Oh, not depression. Depreciation. Okay. You might get a depression from depreciation. And obviously for a vehicle, that's significant, right? Now, what is there on the flip side? Well, on the flip side, there is a house, as an example, okay? And so a house, you'll notice again, has some productivity. We're talking about these from the perspective of business, so we're going to step away from all the like cultural, societal, whatever side of things. And we're just going to talk about it from a business standpoint. So here we're talking about, it's going to give us some cash flow, okay? We're going to collect rent on this property, or if it's farmland, it's going to produce a certain amount of crop yield or something like that, right? If we're, if we have as our business is in it, then, there's space and we have comparables, etc. Okay, so you've got underlying asset and you've got productivity / utility, okay? Now, what is depreciation? How do we know, like, what is this depreciation thing? I think I might have misspelled depreciation, but whatever. My writing is atrocious on these, unfortunately. I apologize for that. So, great. We've got this depreciation. What does that mean? Well, depreciation is a decrease in the ability for that asset to have utility. Okay? So, depreciation is a decrease in utility value. Okay? So these two end up being tied to one another. All right? There are, and we're going to see this very, very importantly, we're going to say we're going to be able to look at the underlying asset and we're going to look at the output. If we just look at the output and we don't look at the underlying asset, can we screw up? Yeah, absolutely. How come? Because maybe it's going to depreciate, which, by the way, it could also increase. Usually it doesn't, but it could, okay? And you might say, well, hang on, doesn't lots of stuff increase? Real estate and all that. We're going to talk about that later, and we'll see how exactly that works. Okay, so we've got utility asset, great. It's going to usually depreciate, but sometimes not. Like, you have to think of a house, okay? Does a house depreciate? Yeah, it does, right? You have to do maintenance on it. Now, is that significant? No, not so much. but over time a house does depreciate. And so when we're looking at valuation, we're paying attention to these two things. What's happening to the value of the underlying asset, and what's happening to the productivity/utility of it. Okay? So long as it continues to if it can put out that same utility for hundreds of years, then great. It's pretty stable, right? Of course, these two are tied to one another. So you think about, like, if you create a video, usually the video has the productivity, the utility of it remains the same for decades, which is great. If you have intellectual property, it's depreciating because after 25 years or so, the patent expires, you're done. Copyright, 75 years is a long time, but say that's how long it is, then it runs out. Okay? So some people talk to me about like passive income, etc. You need to be aware that most things are not totally passive. Usually they at least need some maintenance, or they're going to depreciate. Okay? What else? Is there anything else here that I'm missing? So the thing that I'm going to mention, I'm not sure if I have any other place that we're going to talk about it, so we'll talk about it now, is understanding that all assets need utilization. Okay? What I mean by that is they need to be worked. Okay? All assets need to be worked. So there's no such thing as a 100% passive asset. Okay? All assets need to be worked. All right? So, a property. Is a property going to pay you money? This is some people will talk about this. They'll say, well, the house isn't the asset, the renter is. No, the house is the asset. Okay? The renter pays you to use the asset. Without the house, you wouldn't have a renter. Okay? So the house is the asset. That's how we're defining this. It's fine. But do you absolutely need to get renters for it and rent it out? Yes. For a farm, do you need to work that farm in order for it to produce? Yes, you do. With, let's say as an example, a vehicle, right? Do you need to use it for it to be worth something, for it to have that value? Yes, even if the way you're using it is showing it off in some sort of a automobile specialty classic show thing, right? You need something to do to show it off, to make it work. You might say, well, what about a bond? Is a bond an asset? Yeah, a bond is kind of an asset, right? It's paying you each month. But, does that work forever? No, and where's that coming from? Somebody's having to work to provide you with that return. Okay? So there's varying degrees of how passive something is, right? Real estate can be pretty set and forget. Bonds, even more so. Index funds, things like this, but overall, somebody has to be working the asset to get it. And by the way, some of those, what we're mentioning, they're technically instruments. We are going to talk a little bit about some distinctions between instruments and assets later on. But the whole key is that that's some of where we see a little bit of this, how passive it is, distinction. Okay? So just understand, all of the value requires somebody to create utilization. If you have a house that is not being rented out, it's costing you money every month. If you're renting it out, maybe it's making you money every month, provided you can rent it out for enough. If you have a vehicle, if you're not doing anything with it, it's costing you money every month. Now the worst part in the case of the vehicle is it's depreciating a lot faster than the house is, right? 5, 10, 15, whatever years it is, it's pretty much done. And of course there they have, there the depreciation is based on utilization as well as on age, right? So let's make a note of that. Time and utilization. Okay, time and utilization. Whereas, say, a house, generally, whether you're using it or not, doesn't particularly change, or doesn't dramatically change the value. So the utilization is basically a time-based depreciation as opposed to a utilization-based depreciation. Right? You don't have kids who destroy it or something like that, right? Hope that helps, gives you a basic start on our valuation. We're going to dive way, way deeper into it, but it's just really important that you understand these fundamental two pieces. Okay, so if you think about a stock, the stock has, the company has assets that they own, like, you know, it's what we're going to call book value. We'll talk about those terminologies in a bit. The terminology, and then it's producing cash flow, right? If you think about a bond, the bond has an underlying cash value, and it's producing cash flow. So if we compare, which we will later, bonds to houses, we're going to see there's a difference in depreciation, how that works relative to cash value, and how that affects returns, which we're going to examine. I hope that helps. Reach out to us, join the action classes. We're going to work with you one-on-one to help give you the specific information that you need, as well as the connections. I'll see you guys on the next video.